Today we're going to take a look at a case from a company that many of you probably have never heard of before, but may pretty soon. This is the T801 from GEEEK, a DIY assembled Micro ATX tower with a compact and thoughtful design and an excellent concept behind it. The concept here is that you can assemble a fully functional PC enclosure with just laser cut acrylic panels and a few metal beams. The cost to manufacture these parts is extremely low. There's no sheet metal or injection molded plastic, and so the costs for tooling are virtually nothing. Still though, the T801 is on the market for $65 and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The T801 is relatively compact as well at just 23 liters of volume, and that's something that you guys know I'm a huge fan of. All of your components fit in nice and snug without much wasted space, and we do have some thoughtful options for airflow as well. Firstly, let's take a look at what you first receive when you get the case, and what sets this case apart from many others, including some of their own models, is that it's a complete DIY assembly. You'll receive a flat pack of acrylic panels, metal beams, and the required nuts and bolts, and you'll need to build the case yourself. No instruction manual is included, unfortunately, however there is one online, but even then the manual is not entirely helpful. It's enough to give you a rough idea on which panels go where, but beyond that you're pretty much on your own. It's full of missing steps, assumptions, and even incorrect illustrations, and for a DIY project this absolutely needs a ton of work. The protective film is left on the acrylic panels, and I would recommend to actually peel these off before you start working with the case, as otherwise they'll be a little bit tricky to get off when the case is assembled. The motherboard tray is the first panel to be constructed, with the motherboard standoffs being screwed in first, and some of the holes here were not tapped correctly, so some of these countersunk screws unfortunately don't sit flush with the panel. The acrylic panels are bolted onto these aluminium beams, which I've found to work pretty well, but be patient because the corresponding part does slide around quite a bit in there, and this can be pretty frustrating. The side panels as well are not the same length as the aluminium beams, and this results in a gap between the beam and the top panel, which does not look too pleasing. And even when they do fit flush, like the front panel and the bottom panel, there's still a gap between them caused by the panels flexing. And so measurements between all of the parts need to be refined so that fitment of every panel, beam, and screw is nice and flush and pleasing to the eye, otherwise it only looks good from a distance. I'm not sure why they didn't decide to laser cut the GPU I/O slots as well. You're forced to snap them by hand, which leaves a bit of a scar behind if not done properly. The building process is fulfilling though, with a sense of progress with each new part, and despite the frustrating elements along the way, in the end we end up with the compact, clean looking Micro ATX enclosure that we were promised. In terms of design though, I am happy with what GEEEK have strived for here. The case is pretty compact for a Micro ATX build, which I'm sure a lot of you will appreciate. Now there are thoughtful cutouts in the motherboard tray to route your cables, but the distance between the motherboard tray and the side panel is only enough for a few cables, and definitely no room for SSDs or RGB hubs back here. As always, a custom set of cables is always recommended in compact builds like this. Compatibility wise, you've got the choice for an ITX or Micro ATX motherboard, CPU coolers with a height of up to 170mm, which is plenty, and a graphics card length of up to 276mm, so all Founders Editions cards will fit, and some add-in board partners cards will fit as well. And by the way, the graphics card is secured with a screw-in slot, which I think works pretty well. For power supplies, we've got support for ATX units, which are up to 170mm long, and we've also got a mindful cutout in the top panel for some extra airflow. 3 120mm fans can be installed, 2 underneath the graphics card, which I recommend running as intakes to help with GPU temps, and also a single fan next to the CPU cooler, which you can run as exhaust. Now, storage support is pretty neat. Up to 3 3.5 inch drives can be installed with the included bracket and then screwed into the top panel, or you can fit up to 7 2.5 inch drives stacked in this orientation here, or if you're only using a single 2.5 inch drive like I am here, you can also install it like this and hide all of your cables coming out of the power supply. Also note that the T801 can be used horizontally as well, although mine didn't come with the mounts to do that, so I won't be able to show you what that looks like. And so the finished build is the usual test system with a Ryzen 5 1600 and a GTX 1060 plugged into a B350 motherboard. And without further ado, let's look at those temperatures. So in terms of airflow, we are pretty restricted here since we're working with flat acrylic panels, and unfortunately there's no room for front or top intake fans. Let's start off by looking at CPU temperatures in Prime 95, and with the stock configuration with the T801 in its vertical orientation, we do see some warmer temperatures than what we're used to with this system, with the Ryzen 5 1600 sitting at 68 degrees C. As always, ambient temperature has been accounted for, and the results reflect an ambient room temperature of 20 degrees C. And now with the T801 in its horizontal orientation, just laying flat on the acrylic panel since I don't have the mounting brackets, we see a noticeable reduction of 4 degrees C. Next, I removed the front panel just to see how restrictive it was, and now with the T801 in its vertical orientation, we see an improvement of about 6 degrees C compared to when it was installed, so that really highlights that airflow is pretty restrictive. The bottom intake fans are doing quite a bit of work though, and I definitely recommend installing them, and although you may think they only help GPU temperatures, they do help the CPU load temperatures as well by a couple degrees. Okay, now let's look at the GPU temperatures while gaming, and here with the T801 in its normal vertical orientation, the 1060 is sitting at 67.6 degrees C, which is actually not bad. In its horizontal orientation though, the bottom intake fans have a lot more air to pull in, and we can see over a 5-degree reduction in temperatures here, so keep this in mind if you're going to be overclocking in this case, because both CPU and GPU temperatures were significantly better in the horizontal orientation. With the front panel removed, we don't see a drastic change at all for GPU temperatures, but with the bottom intake fans removed, there is a huge difference, with the GTX 1060 now almost 9 degrees hotter than before. So again, those bottom intake fans are definitely coming in handy. And so, summing up, after building the case from the ground up and testing the system, here's what I think. I really like the concept. The idea of building a full enclosure with just a few acrylic panels and some basic tools is something that I really enjoyed. I like that the case is transparent and that the airflow, despite being pretty restrictive, actually improves dramatically once you start adding in fans. The T801 is super compact, which I love, but here's what I'd like to see change. First is the price. $65 US for an acrylic case is not something that I can really get behind, especially one that you need to build yourself, and also when there's not much effort that has been placed in the user manual at all. There definitely needs to be some refining as well. Some of the parts don't fit perfectly together, and panels are a bit rough around the edges, and the nuts and bolts are a bit of a pain in the butt as well. So there's my thoughts on the T801 from GEEK. I'll include a link to their store in the description below. They have some pretty cool cases over there, I have to say. The A30 is one that I've personally got my eyes on at the moment, so expect a review on that in the future. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, guys, and as always, I'll see you all in the next one.